again, no reason. They're like, what the heck is happening? Like, I live a good life. Why am I so anxious to the point where I'm having a panic attack? Or they're lying awake at 2 a.m. and their mind is racing and they can't go to sleep. And then they wake up feeling exhausted. And it's like this wired but tired feeling all day. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And if this resonates for you, I would really encourage you to talk more about this, because this is something that so many women are dealing with, and so many women do not have the right resources to figure out physiologically what is driving their mood symptoms. So let's dive into it. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of She's in Sync, the podcast for men looking to have a safe and powerful transition off of birth control and heal their hormones naturally. Today, we are going to be talking about labs to run to uncover the root cause of your anxiety, PMS, mood swings, irritability, insomnia, poor sleep issues, because I've been having a lot of conversations with women lately in their 20s and 30s and even early 40s. And so many of them have been dealing with these mood symptoms on or after stopping birth control, or just in general. And there have been a couple of things that come up. Their doctor has just kind of brushed it off as like, oh, you must be starting perimenopause. And to me, that's a cop-out, because yes, it could be, but also that's like saying go on birth control when you have a missing period. It doesn't solve the deeper root issue, like why is that happening? And it's kind of like this blanket statement. It's not being explored. So, I've been also in Facebook groups recently, and there have been women who are in their not early 20s, but like mid to late 20s posting about that, of how, they're having irritability and bouts of rage and just feeling anxious all the time. And their doctor just basically diagnosed them with like early menopause. And I'm like, oh my gosh, girlfriend, there's like so many things we can explore here. And the thing is, so many women are dealing with mood symptoms. And I have other podcast episodes about, and we'll touch on it again here if you haven't listened to those, and I'll link them again in the show notes. But I have other episodes specifically about how birth control literally changes our brain and it blunts our stress response. So we are less resilient to stress when it happens, AKA it hits harder and we can't cope with it as efficiently. And there are so many mechanisms behind birth control. And think about how many women have been on birth control before, and how prevalent anxiety and PMS and depression is in women. It's way higher in women than it is men. And I think that, of course, we have to look at our men coming forward with mental health issues. I think it's more rare because there's a stigma around that for a lot of people in general, but especially men, I think, because it can be seen as a weakness. So the data might be a little bit skewed in that way. And I can't help but wonder if it's because so many of us have been on birth control for, 5 to 10 plus years. And it does have those side effects, along with just juggling all the things in life that we're juggling. There's a lot of women who, aren't stay-at-home moms anymore. And it's more of the norm to work and, deal with the kids and do all the things. And so we're just juggling a lot. So anyways, all that being said, I've been having a lot of conversations with women about this, and I wanted to shed some light on how you can dig deeper and really uncover what is driving your mood symptoms, because mood symptoms are not just psychological. They're not just emotional. They're physiological as well. So there are things, imbalances in your body that can impact your mood. And so we're going to be talking about specific tests to run to unveil what your specific root causes of your mood symptoms are. And I'm going to be pointing out really common patterns that I see in women from these tests to, again, shed some light on these deeper root issues, that it's not just about, well, switch birth control again, or get on or get off birth control, or, just meditate more, stress less, try anti-anxiety medication, go to therapy. Those are common things that I've heard, and women have done all those things and they're still dealing with significant mood symptoms that, quite literally impact their entire life, right? Like they're snapping at their kids or their partner for quote unquote no reason. They're having panic attacks and they're going to the ER that for, again, no reason. They're like, what the heck is happening? Like, I live a good life. Why am I so anxious to the point where I'm having a panic attack? Or they're lying awake at 2 a.m. and their mind is racing and they can't go to sleep. And then they wake up feeling exhausted. And it's like this wired but tired feeling all day. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And if this resonates for you, I would really encourage you to talk more about this, because this is something that so many women are dealing with, and so many women do not have the right resources to figure out physiologically what is driving their mood symptoms. So let's dive into it. The first lab I would recommend for identifying the root causes of your mood symptoms would be some functional blood labs. And with blood labs, I always give this caveat of working with someone. It's not just about running the right labs, but it's also making sure you're working with someone who interprets them correctly. Because you'll see there's a really wide range of what is normal for these labs, but what is optimal is not looked at. So when I'm looking at blood labs, I'm looking at what's optimal for women's health. So for example, B vitamins. This is the first one I'd recommend looking at, vitamin B12. Conventional blood labs, like if you go get your B12 run at your doctor, they're going to say anything from like 300 to 1,000 is normal. I want B vitamins to be above 900, or B12 specifically to be above 900, not all B vitamins. I want B12 to be above 900. So when I look at clients' labs, a lot of times their B vitamins are really, really low. Like they're in the 300s, the 400s, the 500s, but they haven't been flagged before. And B vitamins are really important for energy and for mood. They help with certain neurotransmitters in the brain, which are important for mood. They're also, one of these things we have to think about too is absorption of B vitamins, and birth control depletes B vitamins naturally. And birth control negatively impacts the digestive system, which can make absorption of B vitamins less optimal. So B vitamins are the first thing I would look at. The next one is copper and zinc. Oof, could I go off and have a whole podcast episode about this? I'm going to start with just overall copper and zinc. They're really, really important for energy and for mood together. And you want both of them to be around 100 when you test in the blood. What I see a lot of is two different scenarios. The first one is more of a copper toxicity presentation, which is where copper is really, really high and zinc is low. These two things balance each other out, which is why you want a 1-to-1 ratio. You want both of them to be around 100 in the blood. So copper toxicity is when copper is really high, zinc is really low. So I'm going to go through some case studies a little bit later showing you all of this in action. But an example of this would be if someone's copper is like 185. That's even conventionally, they're going to flag that as high, but no one's running copper. Like the average doctor and even functional medicine doctor isn't running copper. But let's say it's 185. Those are levels that are very common for me to see, especially after birth control, which I'll get to. And then zinc is like 50. There's a big imbalance between copper and zinc. And so I would take my clients through what's called a copper detox protocol. And this isn't a detox of like juice cleanses and like no fun foods or anything like that. This is actually incorporating some zinc-rich foods, a zinc supplement, and then some binders and some antioxidants to bind to that copper so your body eliminates it. And we also want to work on optimizing detox pathways as well. So this is something where we want to be strategic about that. With the birth control side of things, we talked about how copper and zinc have an inverse relationship. So what we want those to be in balance. Estrogen and copper have a synergistic relationship. So when estrogen is high, a lot of times they see high copper because they rise together. So if you've been on birth control that has estrogen in it, or if you've ever been on estrogen therapy, you might have high copper levels. So if you have high copper levels, it can get stored in the brain, which can cause anxiety, depression, ADHD symptoms, low energy, insomnia, even joint aches and pains, and just inflammation in general. I have a client who she had really high levels of copper coming off birth control, and she had a lot of joint pain and like sitting and standing, and she was in her 20s. And she, like, sitting and standing, her job was working with kids and being pretty active. She was like, I literally feel like I'm 80 years old. And then we did the copper detox protocol and she felt better. But when we have rising estrogen levels and rising copper levels, then that can be from birth control. And then you add on top of that birth control's impact on it, just overloads detox pathways. Like, it burdens your liver, your gallbladder, your gut is a detox pathway, your skin. And so we can't detox that copper. So we're having this buildup, and then our body can't get rid of it because our detox pathways are sluggish. So this is something, especially if there are certain times in your cycle when estrogen rises, if you start to notice you're starting to become more sensitive or anxious, then this would be something to check out. So most people just jump to, oh, you're estrogen dominant. But that's just scratching the surface. We want to look at, well, why is your estrogen high? And the copper piece is a big component of that, because it's like this vicious feedback loop of like the estrogen raises the copper raises the estrogen. And why is your body having trouble clearing that copper and clearing that estrogen? So this is where looking deeper than just hormones is important. So that's scenario one, is when copper is really, really high and zinc is really, really low. And this is very common post-birth control, especially if you've been on the combination birth control, which has the estrogen in it, or you've been on hormone replacement therapy that has estrogen as a component of that. The second scenario with copper and zinc is both are really low. So copper is low and zinc is low. So you need a balance. Copper isn't bad. But I want to make that very clear. Copper is really, really important for mood, and copper is really important for skin. It's really important for iron recycling, so we don't get iron stuck in the tissues, which can cause inflammation. If both of these are too low, then the same symptoms as the excess copper will come up. Anxiety, depression, low energy, insomnia, ADHD symptoms, brain fog, difficulty concentrating or thinking, joint aches and pains. All of those things are a sign of either high or low copper. So this is where testing versus guessing is important here. So do you need more copper? Do you need a detox copper? Is your copper okay, but do we need to raise your zinc and be strategic around making sure we raise that zinc without depleting that copper? This is also why it's really important not to blindly supplement, because zinc, it's another thing that birth control depletes. So B vitamins and zinc are often ones that I see women who are prepping to come off birth control, what they are supplementing with, because they read online or ChatGPT told them this, or they read in a book somewhere or Reddit, whatever, that's what they need more of because birth control depletes it. But not necessarily. You might not need them in a supplement version. And you also might actually not need them, but you just need to focus on making sure you're absorbing them, because just like with B vitamins, if you have low stomach acid, you're not absorbing zinc either optimally. So far we've talked about B vitamins, copper and zinc, and having the right ratio of those two things. And the last thing I'd say is homocysteine. I could have a whole thing on blood labs, what to look for with mood, but I wanted to choose my top three because we're going to go through some other labs too, and how it's all interconnected. So the next one is homocysteine. This is basically how your body is methylating, and methylating is like a really like scientific complex thing to explain. So honestly, I just say like this is how your body is processing and using B vitamins to support brain chemistry. So if you have high homocysteine levels, that can show slower methylation. You're not using those B vitamins correctly, or you need more B vitamins in a certain form, which can lead to anxiety, depression, brain fog, poor detox capacity, and nervous system dysregulation. On the flip side, if you have low homocysteine, this can indicate overmethylation or an imbalanced methylation. So what that can look like is the same symptoms, just a little bit different though, I will say. So anxiety, feeling more jittery, irritability, insomnia, and feeling overly stimulated. So this one's more, I think, of like anxious energy, like jittery, versus the high homocysteine, when you're slower methylating, it's more like depression, kind of slower brain fog, poor detox. That's kind of how I conceptualize it. So, and again, we'll have a case study with these things, all three of these things I'm focusing on in this case study at the end. So stay tuned for that. And this is important because if you need more B vitamins, having like a methylated form of B vitamins might be important depending on if you're under or over methylating, and your homocysteine levels can show us that. The next test I would run to get to the root of your mood symptoms is a GI map. So we don't want to just stop at looking at nutrients. As I said before, we want to also look at how is your body digesting and absorbing those nutrients. Is it digesting and absorbing those nutrients? This piece is something many people skip because they're not taking a whole body approach. They're just looking at like what nutrients are you low in, but I want to look at, okay, are you absorbing those nutrients as well? Because you can just waste a bunch of money on a bunch of supplements, but if you're not absorbing them, then it's not going to do you any good. You're kind of like on this merry-go-round of like, you're just going to have to keep taking those and they might not even like make a dent. 90% of our feel-good neurotransmitter serotonin is also produced in the gut. So if you have digestive issues, if you have gut issues, that is going to impact your mood. And there's a lot more research on this, a lot more, I would say, acknowledgement of this over the last several years compared to even when I was in school to become a dietitian. Like there's so much more research and acknowledgement of the importance of gut health in mood. So the first thing, which I've touched on already, is low stomach acid. And this is when your body can't absorb the nutrients your brain needs that we just talked about, specifically those B vitamins and zinc. So if this is the case, that is the first thing we want to address. And 95% of my clients, I would venture to say 95% of my clients I work with have low stomach acid. And we identify this in a few ways on the GI map. It could be an overabundance of beneficial bacteria, just overgrowth in general, can show that we have low stomach acid. It can be H. pylori presence, or the presence of a lot of pathogens because they thrive in a low stomach acid environment, or if someone keeps getting food poisoning or someone keeps getting infected. So I know for myself with my H. pylori eradication journey, I had really high levels of H. pylori for 2 years, and I kept trying to kill, went through so many killing protocols and they weren't working. I kept getting, it was either only eradicated for a short period of time or it wasn't all eradicated, or I kept getting reinfected. And this is one where it can transmit orally. So Jared, my fiance, could likely have it. And if we kiss, if we share a drink, if we taste each other's food, use the same utensils, I could easily get reinfected if I have low stomach acid. So I would say that's another mistake a lot of functional providers make, is they jump straight to the killing because that's the sexy, fancy stuff, right? It's like, oh, you have a parasite, let's kill. Oh, you have H. pylori, let's kill. And yes, we want to eventually, but we want to go in the right order to make sure we're optimizing your body so that you don't just get reinfected. Your gut immune response is built up to ward off those pathogens from coming back. So that was a little side tangent, but it's important to note that. But the presence of those pathogens can indicate low stomach acid, and H. pylori actually can lower stomach acid. So that's a vicious cycle in and of itself. If we're talking about getting on a symptom merry-go-round or a hamster wheel, that's one, because it can lower stomach acid, but then it can also thrive in a low stomach acid environment. So for me, I did a lot of stomach acid support, but because my H. pylori was so high, it really didn't make a dent. I still am glad I did that, but it wasn't until I eradicated that my stomach acid went back up to where it needed to go. So really, really important. The other thing with this too is that most conventional doctors don't talk about low stomach acid. They're very focused on high stomach acid. And the thing with that is low stomach acid symptoms can present as high stomach acid symptoms. So if you have acid reflux, most of the time it's assumed that you have too much stomach acid. So you're given PPIs to lower the stomach acid, but actually that can make things worse. And if you've ever had that happen, it might work temporarily, but those symptoms keep coming back. And that's because it's not getting to the root of the problem. So if that's you and you resonate with that, and that's been the approach that's been taken, I would venture to believe you likely have low stomach acid, and that's why it keeps getting worse and keeps coming back. I had a client like that. She was one of my first ever clients when I opened my own business, and she was not a birth control client. She was a client who we were specifically working on GI stuff with. And she had done a lot of antibiotics. She was on a bunch of PPIs. She was on a lot of restrictive elimination diets. She was in her 30s and had been on all of that stuff like on and off again since college and without any relief. And what we learned is she had really low levels of good bacteria and really low stomach acid. So when we supported those things and rebuilt up her gut microbiome and supported stomach acid, she could eat any and all food she wanted and have great digestion. And her hormones improved as a result, and her energy improved as a result. So we actually worked on, with her doctor, offboarding that PPI she was on, and she didn't need it. What she actually needed was stomach acid support and gut microbiome support. So that's a really important thing that a lot of doctors miss or get wrong, quite frankly. The next thing we want to look for with the GI map, which is the stool test, is leaky gut or intestinal permeability. So this is when the tight junctions of the intestinal lining get cracks in them, essentially. Not like literal cracks, but just they become leaky, they become permeable. So substances that were supposed to stay in the intestinal tract, food, particles, medication, things like that, they get into the blood, and that can go to the brain, and that can cause inflammation. You get leaky gut from a variety of things: poor diet, stress, not eating enough, not getting enough nutrients, medication like birth control. There's lots of things that can cause this. So it's kind of assumed that most of my clients have some degree of intestinal permeability and leaky gut just because of birth control history, stress, depleted minerals, other medications, just living in a world where we have, even if you try to eat super, super clean and natural, like pesticides can also impact this. So we want to repair the intestinal lining so that this source of inflammation is not a source anymore that can impact mood. And then the last thing I want to focus on is high beta-glucuronidase, which can lead to poor estrogen detoxification. So beta-glucuronidase is an enzyme that we can see in the GI map that actually undoes your body's attempt to detox estrogen in the stool. And so this leads to estrogen getting recycled in the body versus being eliminated in your stool. So this can contribute to estrogen dominance. So I always go back to this because if you've been listening now for a while, or if this is your first episode with me, just know I rarely test hormones because they don't uncover the root of the problem. This is an example of I ran a Dutch test with a client as my first test for them and didn't look at a stool test. If they had high estrogen, it'd be like, well, I don't really know what's causing it. Let's just put them on DIM, or let's just eat some estrogen support foods, which isn't a bad thing, but we have to look deeper at why is the estrogen higher? And this can be one reason why is if they're not detoxing estrogen in the stool, it can contribute to estrogen dominance, which can lead to those fluctuations in your mood throughout your cycle. So it's another thing to kind of consider depending on when you start to notice those mood swings or the rage or the irritability. Things that can cause high beta-glucuronidase are bacterial overgrowth, so too much bad bacteria, too little of the good bacteria, antibiotic use, liver stress, and dietary lifestyle things. So stress in general, too much protein and low fiber. So in an era of keto and in an era of intermittent fasting and protein, this can actually work against you. So this is why we need a balance. Yes, protein is great, but we need fiber, we need carbs, we need fat for hormone health. So those are the three things I'd look at with the stool test, the GI map. The last test I want to talk about for mood specifically is an HTMA. This is a hair tissue mineral analysis. This is such a cool test because this is what opened my eyes to how stressed I was. And it opens a lot of my clients' eyes because if you are like me and most of my clients, you're a type A, perfectionist, recovering people pleaser, ambitious, driven woman, And a lot of us are like that, and we are running around naturally just thriving in a stressed state, but we don't feel stressed. I'm going to say that again. We are running around in a stress state. We are constantly, our body is constantly running on cortisol, but we don't feel stressed until something random happens and we're like, holy crap, I'm stressed. So, I've talked about this before I don't know if I've talked about it here, but a little story I want to share with you is I noticed this when I was in college. I distinctly remember this. It was my freshman year of college. So I didn't have a car. I was, just like out of my element. I was not a kid who was like really looking forward to going to college. And I was like homesick and just felt like a little bit lost and didn't really make any friends yet. And it was the beginning of college. And so I remember I had a neighbor friend of mine who had a car. She was older. She took me to the grocery store. And when I was at the grocery store, I think I had like a debit card. I don't know. I think I had a debit card and like the limit ran out or like I didn't have enough in my account or something like that. My parents like put a certain amount of money in there. And so like we went to Walmart. I got some groceries and stuff, got some stuff for my dorm, and like my card was declined. And it was like the first week of school and like Walmart was packed, so stressful, so embarrassing. And then like that was the whole ordeal. And then we came back to the dorm and I was like putting my food away in my little mini fridge and I had this little package of blueberries and it fell on the floor and it just like spread all over. And like the dorm room was like dirty. And like I was like, well, these blueberries I'm not eating these. And I just started crying. And I was like, I'm literally, like when they say crying over spilled milk, I literally was crying over spilled blueberries. And that's an example of like, okay, yeah, that was like just a shitty day, but it's like because I was so type A and just my stress level was at its max in general because I was like at school and, but if you take a step back, it's like, I'm so grateful. I'm in college. Like I have someone who took me to the grocery store. I can afford food. Like my parents are helping me. It's like, I didn't live a bad life, but it's like just little things like that added up. And then I'm crying over spilled blueberries. But before that, I would have had no idea that I was stressed. So those are examples of you likely are just running on cortisol. And I, looking back, was doing that my whole life. I still do that and am working on that to this day. So the HTMA test is showing for the past 3 months your nervous system state. Are you stuck in sympathetic dominance or are you stuck in parasympathetic sympathetics? Are you in fight or flight? Or are you, more of this like shut down, depressed state? If you're stuck in either of those things, we want to be a healthy middle of like sometimes we're in fight or flight, sometimes we're in parasympathetic, but you don't want to be stuck in either. It can also show, or it also does show, if you're low in certain minerals that are calming. So calcium, magnesium, for example, those are calming minerals. Those are also really important for period cramps. We'll talk about that next week on the podcast. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that one. And if you're low in minerals in general, this is going to result in you being less resilient to stress. So we talked about that at the very beginning of this episode with birth control. It makes you less stress resilient. You can't cope with stress. It hits harder when it does happen. So those spilled blueberries, yeah, it might have annoyed me, but it's like it wouldn't have caused me to cry if I had better stress resilience. And if you have a calcium shell, so if you have too low of calcium, but if you also have too high of calcium, this is something I see. It's your body is literally forming a protective shell and holding on to that calcium. And that's usually due to long-term stress and or trauma. So this HTMA can literally show if you have trauma. How crazy is that? And most of my clients, when they see that and explain that, they're like, that makes sense. I wouldn't have identified I have trauma, but like I do. And I will also say this is why a lot of my clients, I'm not going to say everybody, but like a lot of my clients after working with me, because we go so deep and we look at not just the physical symptoms and the physical piece of things, but we talk about the mental, emotional side of things. And this is why a lot of my clients, after seeing their test results, they're like, I need a therapist. Like I have just been running on cortisol and not even realizing how stressed I am, but this data doesn't lie. This data doesn't lie. And so, this can be really powerful, and it's so important for healing. It's so important to attack both of these things. So just like, it's not a matter of just stress less. If you physically have like a calcium shell, or if you have high beta glucuronidase, or you have leaky gut, if you have, copper toxicity, that's impacting your ability. You can't just stress less. And we will also want to make for sure you're slowing down, you're setting boundaries, you are offboarding tasks and not taking everything on. It needs to be both of those things. And I work on both of those things with my clients, the physical piece, but then also the mental piece of things too. And sometimes, when they need that additional support and it's out of my scope, then that's when we bring a therapist on board as well, or someone who specializes in the nervous system. And I'm also going to be having a chat with a nervous system coach here in a little bit too. So that podcast will be coming if this is resonating with you too. All right. So we talked about mineral health with that. And like I said, birth control significantly depletes many, many minerals. And so this is something that this is step number 1 is replenishing minerals, eating enough, replenishing minerals, rebuilding the gut, focusing on detox pathways. And then after that, we can go a little bit harder and heavier with some of those other protocols, like a gut killing protocol if needed, iodine protocol if needed, copper toxicity protocol if needed. But we need to work on the foundational stuff first so your body can handle that and it's a smooth experience. Okay, case studies. Let's go into some case studies here. So these are all on my Instagram. If you don't follow me, make for sure you follow me, because I like to post case studies. And I also have some case studies on the podcast too of clients who have come on and actually talked about their experience. But the first client I want to talk about is my client, Lindsay. She's a VIP client of mine. And she came to me wanting to transition off birth control, feeling stuck because she wanted to get off, but she was terrified that she'd spiral like she'd seen happen to so many other people that she knew. And she was also really struggling with anxiety, emotional outbursts, and intense waves of crying out of nowhere that left her feeling like hopeless and just out of control. She also had some digestive stuff going on. So she had bloating and felt like she had to like run to the bathroom, and it was like urgent. And deep down, she knew her body was trying to get her attention, but she just didn't know what it was trying to say. So she'd already tried blindly supplementing with like probiotics and talking to her doctor about getting labs done. And she got the classic, everything looks great, everything looks normal. She tried therapy and said it was helpful, but it wasn't fixing the problem. It was kind of just like tamping it down a little bit, but then all those symptoms would keep coming back up. So she felt just trapped in this like loop of symptoms that no one had answers to. So what we did, of course, was a deep dive assessment. We start with that, and then we did some functional testing. So right away in her assessment, before we even ran labs, I told her, and she actually identified this herself. Like, she's very in touch, identified this herself. I was like, we need to set some healthy boundaries, because she was saying yes to everything, and she was always busy. And she was always taking on things from so many people that was really stressing her out. And she would just constantly feel stressed with all the things she had to do and all the weight of things people were putting on her. And she did it to herself. She said yes to them. So it's not their fault. And so we had a conversation around like protecting her time, protecting her space and her energy. And she has done such a great job with that. Like, amazing. So that was one thing we started implementing. And that's an example of, even before we get to the physical with the labs, what are some things we can do mentally, emotionally to protect your space and your energy? When we ran the labs, we found high copper. So her levels were, I think, like in the 180s. And again, this can get stored in the brain, and it can cause racing thoughts and inflammation. She also had really low sodium and potassium. So we didn't talk about this with the HTMA, but these are 2 of your macrominerals along with magnesium and calcium. So they're still important for mood. But if you have low sodium and potassium, this can impact adrenal health and overall cellular health, which is what impacts your stress resiliency. And then she also had poor digestion and nutrient malabsorption. So this was obviously contributing to her bloating, but this was also impacting her mood because she wasn't absorbing the nutrients from the food she was intaking, and she was really, really deficient. So we created a personalized plan for her. We did the copper detox protocol, which is a couple of months. We replenished key minerals through strategic foods and supplements, and then we supported digestion without cutting off or cutting out her favorite foods. And within just 1 month, she said she felt like she had a better mood, much less anxiety, and more energy. And then month 2, she said she had less urgency, was less bloated, and she didn't fear leaving the house and needing to ID a bathroom because her gut health had improved so much, and she wasn't scared of going out to eat or things like that. So instead of throwing random supplements at things or just being told, oh, well, just stay on birth control, this is where the data can help create a clear plan based on what your body needs, designed specifically for you. And a coach, aka me, in your corner every single step of the way, so you know you're focusing on the right things based on your biology, not outdated medical advice rooted in male-centric research studies. So that's Lindsay. The next case study I want to go through is, let's do Mare. So this is a client who she enrolled in my accelerator anxiety track. So the accelerator is a 6-week accelerated program. You get 2 labs versus VIP, which is what Lindsay did. They get 4. So, and that's 5 months. So Mare was in my accelerator anxiety track. So we ran functional blood labs and an HTMA. And just a little bit about Mare, she is a mom of 3. And she told me that the week before her period, her anxiety and her mood was very cyclical. And the week before her period felt unbearable. She couldn't sleep. She needed 3 cups of coffee just to function. And she relied on wine and edibles at night to calm down. She had to numb herself. And she said, I can't tolerate anything. I want to scream, run away, and hide. And she was like, that's not obviously possible or preferred with 3 kids, a husband, and a full-time job. So she was apprehensive to work with me. I'm just going to call it out because I want to validate that, because when you've tried all these things and been told everything looks normal a million times, that can feel really scary to invest financially and energetically in someone again. So she had seen multiple doctors who told her everything on her labs looked normal. She was advised to just switch birth controls. Again, she was playing birth control roulette and prescribed an antidepressant, but none of them helped. So she just felt really stuck, helpless, and confused. And, her big fear was, what if my labs come back normal again? What if I spend this money and there's nothing wrong? And so I assured her, I've never seen this happen. When you run the right labs and you have the right person looking at them, I've never had anyone who I've run labs for that we didn't uncover multiple imbalances. And in fact, it's usually the opposite. We uncover way more than what they could have ever imagined. So what we found with her is what's called functional folate deficiency depression. So this is the kind that, well, let me first say how we identified this. So she had really low B vitamins, but conventionally they were normal. She had high homocysteine, and then she had low histamine. And so functional folate deficiency depression is the kind that doesn't respond well to SSRIs, which is what she was on. And it often flares with hormonal shifts and worsens with stress. Bingo. That explains everything for her. So with this data, we had a clear roadmap of how to support her body. So we incorporated targeted foods and supplements to replenish those nutrients, the B vitamins, she actually needed copper and zinc, so those things as well. Eating more, she was under-fueling, under-eating, which was negatively impacting her blood sugar. On her HTMA, she showed that her blood sugar was kind of having ups and downs, because the HTMA, along with functional blood labs, can show us that. And then we also incorporated some gentle, natural calming support. So I gave her some, and I told her, this is a Band-Aid to help while we are working on the root causes. But if you need some immediate relief, here's some options. So for example, mineral mocktails, the Ravia Adrenal mocktail that has L-theanine and chamomile in it, and magnesium glycinate. So that's a really nice addition to just support adrenals and just has some calming elements to it. And then there's a specific supplement that had specific herbs in it that she used before sleep when she was having trouble calming down and sleeping. So within 2 weeks of starting her protocol, she was already feeling less stressed. So I checked in with her, and she said when she started, she was a 7 out of 8, or 7 to an 8 out of 10, 10 being hair and fire anxiety. So her stress was a 7 to 8. And 2 weeks after starting this protocol, it felt more like a 4 to 5. And then within just 1 month, she messaged me and she said, I just started my period and had no rage, none. OMG. So within 1 month of identifying these root causes, she was able to heal her mood and anxiety and her cyclical, rage issues. So this is what happens when you identify what your body is trying to tell you and you listen to it and you respond to it. But again, most doctors, they aren't, and therapists and psychologists, they aren't trained to look at the physiological markers like this. So this is where it's really, really important. I'm all for if you need medication. I've been on anxiety medication before. I'm all for if you like, I'm all for therapy. I've been in therapy before, and I recommend a lot of my clients go to therapy. That's obvious, I think, at this point. So it's not that those things are bad, but it's like, again, if those things aren't working, there's something deeper and they haven't been explored yet, which is why working with someone like myself or someone else who specializes in this is really important, especially when you layer in women's health, because there's just so much misinformation and lack of information about women's health cyclically, how our brain changes, how birth control impacts things. So all of that's really important to take into account and simply just doesn't go addressed most of the time. And your anxiety is not random. It's not just hormonal. It's not just mental. Okay. Hopefully at this point, you know that. So if you are listening to this episode and you're like, wow, this has opened my eyes. I've never heard of these tests. I've never had these things done. I'm really interested in learning about this data for myself. This is exactly why I created the hormone healing testing bundle. And it's all of the labs that we ran today, the functional blood labs, the GI map stool test, the hair tissue mineral analysis. Plus, you have the option of adding on loaded iodine testing. So this is really beneficial if you have any acne, eczema, psoriasis, any skin issues, if you have thyroid issues, painful or breast tenderness, painful periods, heavy bleeding. That's where iodine is really helpful, and it's just $150 more. So if you identify with any of those symptoms plus the mood symptoms, I would highly recommend adding on the iodine testing. But this will give you data of like what is off in your body that has not been addressed or explored. And in addition to the labs, you'll also get a video review from me. So it's very personalized. It's going through your data. You also get an intake form that it asks you questions about like, what are your symptoms? What's typical day of eating? What medications are you on? What supplements are you on? So this is designed to help you have real answers or get real answers, identify your clear root causes of what's causing your mood symptoms. So you're not guessing anymore, or you're not just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. So if you want to get out of survival mode and get back to feeling like yourself and thriving, not just surviving, then this is your next step. I highly, highly, highly encourage you to invest in this testing. It's 3 payments of $349 for the 3 labs, or if you want to add on iodine, again, just $150 more total, so $50 more per month, 3 payments of $399. And I'm always willing to work with you if you need extended payment plans or anything like that. Just message me on Instagram or shoot me an email. Instagram's probably the best way to get in touch with me. I'm happy to work with you because I never want finances to get in the way of getting the support and the answers you need. So I hope this episode was helpful. I hope it gave you deeper insight into the root causes of your anxiety, your PMS, your rage, your irritability, any and all mood symptoms, because more women deserve to know that it's not just in their head. It's not just in your head. There's physiological things. There's deeper root causes going on. So share this with a friend, a colleague, a family member. And if you haven't yet and you found this episode helpful, please like, subscribe, leave a review. It really helps grow the show. I so appreciate it. And until next time, stay nourished, friends.